topics. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Hi everyone, my name is Becky Robinson and this is Dr. John Izzo, and we're joining you today to talk about the 5 Thieves of Happiness. Before we get started, I want to make you aware of a few features of GoToWebinar so that you can participate fully in today's event. The first is that we're going to be using the question panel on GoToWebinar, and toward the end of the hour, Dr. Izzo is going to take your questions and will interact with the topics you most want to hear about. And so I would love to invite you now to use that question panel. And a fun fact is that we are broadcasting this webinar event today from 2 countries. John is in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I'm in the United States in the state of Michigan. And we would love to know where you're calling in from in the world. So if you could take a quick moment in the question panel and say hello and let us know where you are. We're going to see if we have any other folks who are calling in from other countries or where you're from. And I'll share some of those locations in just a few minutes. Quite often folks will ask us if we are recording our events, and the answer is yes, we are recording today's event, and we will share that recording with you very soon. You'll be able to access it in our archives forever. And the other thing that you might be curious about is our slides, and we will share the slides from today as a PDF after the event as a resource to you. So John, we have folks from all over. I'm going to share a couple of those with you quickly. We have Utah, Oregon, Virginia, Georgia, Tallahassee, Florida, California, Indianapolis saying hello, New Hampshire, snowy Denver. We have a caller from Saskatchewan, and look at that, I said it. We have Rebecca from Boston, Oakville, Ontario, Winnipeg, Canada, Philadelphia, Laredo, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, someone in Michigan wanting to know where I am, and those of us in Michigan like to use the hand. I live in Lambertville, Michigan, which is about 34 miles south of Ann Arbor. We have also a caller from Toronto and someone from Edmonton. Good gravy. There are a lot of people calling in to join us for this event, and my guess is that it's because people are interested in finding out how to be happy in the new year. A couple of more quick notes for you. We are going to have a very special giveaway at the end of today's event. We're going to give away something we've never given away before on one of my events. So if you are with us, I hope you'll stay on until the very end of this event. One more thing, we would love to invite you to live tweet this event with us, and you'll see Dr. John Izzo is John's Twitter handle, and we are using today the hashtag 5Thieves. So if you love Twitter, and I do, I will not try to be tweeting while I have this conversation with John, but I will look at those tweets later, and John will as well, and we look forward to seeing what resonates with you from this event. John, quick and late breaking, we do have a couple of callers from around the world. We have one from India and one from the UK who have just shouted out their locations.
Welcome.
Indeed. So I want to give a warm welcome to John Izzo and introduce him to you. But before I do that, I want to let you know that today John and I are going to have a conversation, and we're going to talk about some questions related to the book, and then at the very end of the event we will take your questions as well. So I'm going to be on camera the whole hour with you, John, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Great, me too, and welcome to everyone who's joined us. Thanks for coming in and wishing you a happy 2017.
Indeed. So if you haven't met John before this, I would be surprised if you hadn't heard of him. John is the best-selling author of 6 books, and he's advised 500 companies across the globe on creating high-engagement cultures and purpose-driven workplaces. He estimates that he's spoken to over 1 million people on these topics, and just recently was down in Scottsdale, Arizona, speaking to Boeing, as an example. John has been a pioneer in understanding workplace trends and corporate social responsibility. And this book has a very unique perspective, not only on happiness for people, but happiness for our culture as a whole. And John also has another book planned for 2017. We hope to see that one this year too, and is really making a difference in the way that he is a thought leader in these important topics. So John, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks so much. So John, I understand that you've been studying this idea of happiness for quite a long time, and it began when you wrote this best-selling book, 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die. John, tell me, what did you learn about happiness in researching for that book?
Yeah, well, I have been interested in happiness and meaning all of my life. I had the privilege when I was very young to spend a lot of time with older people. And spending time with older people is a great gift because at the end of people's lives, you get to see what they regret, what they wish they had done differently, and where they found that sense of happiness and meaning. And so about 10 years ago now, I did something I call the Wise Elder Project. It really was a very personal project for me. I asked people to nominate the wisest older person they knew. So, we asked literally thousands of people. We got over 2,000 nominations, and I wound up interviewing 250 people from 60 to 106 who had only one thing in common. They were the happiest and wisest older person that someone knew. And it really was a very personal quest for me. I was approaching 50, and I felt I was a happy person, but maybe not as happy as I wanted to be, like for many of us. And so before it was too late, I wanted to sit down with people who had already lived their lives, who had literally 18,000 years of life experience between them. And I wanted to learn what the secrets to happiness and meaning were. And, I'm very proud of the book. It's in 22 or 23 languages. We did a PBS TV series on it. More importantly, I got letters from people all over the world really saying how this book had made a difference for them. But, the interesting thing is 10 years, after that, two things had happened. I definitely became happier after I interviewed those people for the 5 secrets, because I learned that, if you want to be happy, you need to be a giver, you need to leave no regrets, you need to live in the moment, all the great things I learned from these people. But I felt still myself I hadn't achieved that sustainable happiness. Like I could get it. It was like a portal that would open up, but then it would close again. And so I really started thinking about, this journey I went on with these people and how I was very focused on what they had done to gain happiness. But I still hadn't achieved it myself. And when I get letters from people all over the world, they would say, the secrets make sense, but it's so hard to do it in real life. And I found the same thing. So just over a year and a half ago, I set out on a almost 10-month sabbatical. I literally took time off from my work as a speaker, writer, and consultant, and went on a 10-month journey to see if I could rediscover that deep happiness and maybe integrate some of what I had learned. And so this is a picture of me on the Camino de Santiago, a 750-kilometer, 550-mile walk across northern Spain. It's a pilgrimage that Christians have been taking for over 1,000 years, but now today is walked by people of all faiths and non-religious people, and I spent greater than a month walking about 8 or 9 hours a day, average of about 20 miles a day.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, when you walk and you walk where there's not a lot of distractions, I had no internet, I had no laptop with me, I wasn't connected. And I found on this pilgrimage that in these moments of silence and meeting all these other people who were also on a pilgrimage, and as you'd meet people, you'd discover that everybody had a reason they were walking the Camino. And often they didn't even know why they were walking, but they were all, I think, on this journey to find deeper happiness and meaning. And anyway, to make a long story short, it was on the Camino, as I had to confront, all this time with myself and meeting other people, that I started to realize that I think what I had missed when I interviewed those people for the 5 secrets is I was so focused on what they did to find happiness that I didn't realize what they didn't do. I didn't realize that they were able to tame these things that I later came to call the thieves of happiness, these mindsets that get in the way of what I think is naturally ours. So in the book I share a lot of stories of the walk on the Camino. I'll share some today. But it was later in the Andes of Peru, where I spent several months after my time in Spain and Morocco, that I finally named these 5 thieves. And so this was the genesis of the journey, and this walk was one of the most profound experiences, I would say, of my life, really.
Well, John, let's talk a little bit more about the 5 thieves. And one of the things that I discovered in reading it is that the Five Thieves is really about how to train your mind for happiness. And in the book, you say that happiness and compassionate cooperation are our natural state. So what gets in the way of that happiness that should be naturally ours?
Yeah, and I think it's worth pausing on this for just a moment. As I look at all the happiness research and literature, one of the things that strikes me is a lot of it makes it sound like happiness is supposed to be so hard. Like we're naturally unhappy, so we got to go on this heroic quest to become happy. And I think what I've come to realize in my own life is that actually happiness is our natural state. Anybody who's a parent, think of that easy smile, the way an infant smiles so easily at the world. Think about the rest of nature. It's often occurred to me, and when you spend a lot of time in nature, as I got to do on my sabbatical, you're reminded that we're the only creature in nature who seems to struggle so darn hard to find happiness. The trees and the plants just are. The animals just live their life. So all of nature knows that happiness is our natural state. We seem to have forgotten that. And the other thing I was really reinforced for me as I travel all over the world is that in spite of what you read in the daily news, human beings are naturally compassionate cooperators. Almost every person I met in Morocco, in Peru, in Spain, in Europe, wherever, in Africa, where I've spent a lot of time, the vast majority of human beings are actually compassionate cooperators. And the daily news can really rob us of that reality. And in fact, there's a lot of research that suggests the reason we survived as a species is because of the way we cooperated and the level of compassion we had for each other. And so in the book, I explored this idea that happiness is our natural state, and our natural state as a society are compassionate cooperators. But there are these thieves or mental mindsets that get in the way of our happiness. And let me quickly say, the book draws a lot on the spiritual traditions of East and West. And almost all of the spiritual traditions talk about these hindrances to our happiness. Buddhism has the 5 hindrances. Christianity has the 7 deadly sins. Sikhism, the world's youngest large religion, actually has some things they call the thieves of happiness. So I drew on a lot of that as I began to think about that. And as this slide says here, I think the word happiness is even a bit of a challenge because the English word for happiness comes from the Old English word hap, as in happenstance. And the idea is, well, if the happenings are good in your life, then you're going to be happy. And one of the things I learned in interviewing people for the 5 Secrets is that these people who were the happiest older person someone knew did not have lives that were on the external world any happier. These people had all the miseries of human life, from unemployment to death and disappointment to broken hearts and suffering. But somehow there was a way they saw the world, mental mindsets through which they saw the world that I guess filtered their happenings. So one of the things I talk about in the book is how do we disconnect happiness from the happenings of our lives? And we do that, of course, by looking at the mental mindsets that we have through which we see the world, which I call thieves. These are the mindsets that rob us of happiness, no matter what is happening in our lives. And I think most of us, that's what we want. We want happiness that isn't dependent on the happening of the day. I'm happy because something good happened today. No, I'm happy because of something going on in here. And that's kind of, I guess, the big insight.
Sure. So, John, can you tell us a little bit more about the 5 thieves and how they rob us?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, again, I use the thief metaphor very intentionally because, of course, a thief is someone who robs us of something that we already have. So again, I'm saying we already have happiness. We already have this sense of the rightness of life. But these mental mindsets rob us of our happiness. So I like to think of them as distorted filters through which we see our experience. And so what we want to do, and they're all very natural to us. The thieves are not some foreign demons come to, steal our happiness. They're actually a part of our nature that when we let this part of our nature dominate, we wind up being unhappy. So in some ways, this is about harnessing and taming something that is very natural to us, but when we allow it to be in control of the house. You don't want thieves in control of your house.
Not at all.
If they get in, you better make sure they're not in charge. You got to arrest them. So, I tried to name them and then tell people how to arrest them.
Perfect. So let's name them.
Yeah. Well, let's start with number one, control. And I think this guy really images this. And, one thing that I would like to say is that I've discovered in my own life that almost all suffering is resistance to whatever is at any moment. And I want people to take that in for just a moment. Almost all suffering is resistance to whatever is at any moment. And, as human beings, we get very attached to outcomes. We like to be in control. And yet there's so many things that are out of our control. Maybe I want to play tennis today, but it's going to rain. I can't control that. I want to get home on time, but there's a traffic jam. I want to, live a certain kind of life, and then an illness happens, right? So we know that we can't control the outcomes of our lives. And so the more that we focus on control instead of surrender, and in each of the chapters I talk about the oppositional energy. So if control is what robs our happiness because we want to be in control but we can't be, surrender is the opposite energy. And please don't see surrender as, well, I don't care what happens in my life. I talk a lot in this chapter about the fact that we can control our intentions. We can control our actions. What we can't control are our outcomes. So what we want to do is to really focus on what we can control and to surrender to that which we can't control. And I found that on the Camino, because early on the Camino I would get things in my head that I wanted to control. Like on my first few days I met these two wonderful young German pilgrims. And I had a great connection with them, and we walked for a couple of days. And I imagined, well, I'm going to walk the whole Camino with these two, And then one morning, one of them had a different idea. I'm going to stay here for a while. And then the other one kind of wanted to walk faster than I was, and suddenly I was on my own again. And then I would get an idea about where I wanted to stay. I got to stay at this little hostel that I read about. And then I would get there, and it was full or closed. And slowly what I came to realize was that my unhappiness didn't come from my intention to walk with these people or to, stay in a certain place. It was my attachment. And in yoga, in Sanskrit, the word for attachment is sticky desire. So again, let me go back to the core principle. Almost all suffering is resistance to whatever is happening at any moment. So this is about really surrendering to whatever is happening in your life, and at the same time knowing I can still have intentions, I can have goals, but the outcome is not where my happiness is. My happiness is in living my intentions, acting in whatever way I can, and then surrendering to whatever happens regardless.
Very powerful.
So again, control, very, very powerful thief. And when you begin to confront it, I think amazing things start to happen, in your life.
Indeed. So what about this next thief, conceit?
Yeah, the second thief is a really interesting one, conceit. And conceit is really about kind of seeing the world from your small little perspective. It really is about the experience of separation, And if you think about it for a moment, so many of our fears in life have to do with conceit. And think about it for a moment. Why are we afraid to die, really, if we're honest? Well, it's because we're afraid when we die, this little self that we're so attached to will be gone. Why are we, afraid sometimes that we won't find our place in the world? Because we think, well, this world's kind of about me, and if I don't find my place, then I'm in trouble. And one of the things that I really talk about in the Thief of Conceit is that separation is the ultimate illusion. That really, if we think about it, the more we focus on our little story of happiness, The more we focus on ourselves, the more unhappy we are. But the more we take our eyes off ourselves and we get lost in something bigger than ourselves, the happier we are. You know, when I interviewed those people for the 5 Secrets, you know, one of the things I discovered was that the happiest people that people knew were not very focused on finding happiness. They were mostly focused on getting lost in something bigger than themselves. So ironically, the oppositional energy to conceit is actually service. So let me give you an example on the Camino. You know, many times when I was walking the Camino, because I'm on this sabbatical to find happiness, right? And I found sometimes I would walk for an hour or two thinking about my life. How am I going to find happiness? You know, where is happiness going to, you know, what do I have to do? And then after a while, after like about a week or two walking the Camino, I started having these hours where I would refuse to talk to myself about my story. I would say, you know, whenever I would start thinking about my life, I would just say, you know, stop. Just stop thinking about your little life and just get lost for a minute in this bigger world that you're a part of. And the funniest thing, my happiest moments on the Camino were really when I forgot about myself. And the other thing is, my happiest moments was when I would find these moments of being of service to someone. I remember towards the end of the Camino, meeting a woman who was walking in the opposite direction. Because most people just walk one way from France over to the Santiago, but some people walk there and then they walk back. And this young woman had walked from Italy and now was walking back. And I just had this 4 or 5 minute encounter with this young woman, and I wound up asking her, why are you walking the Camino? And she just put her hand on her stomach and she said, because I'm sick. She was maybe only 27, 28 years old. And as soon as she said that, I knew she had cancer. I knew I didn't have to ask her. And we only had this 5-minute interaction in which at one point I said to her, would it be okay if I hugged you? And we had this amazing warm embrace. And I knew in that moment that I had been of deep service to this woman in some way that I couldn't fully understand. And it reminded me that the great task of life in many ways is not to find yourself, but is to lose yourself. It's to realize you're already a part of something much bigger than yourself. You know, even when you die, you were here when the world began. You'll be here when, for all of eternity. We're all a part of this large thing. And the other thing about being a pilgrim on the Santiago is there's one place at the height of the Camino where you leave a rock. And the idea is you leave a rock to symbolize something you want to leave behind, something in your life. And when you get there, there's thousands and thousands of rocks that have been left there for 1,000 years. And what occurred to me is when you get there, there's 2 possible reactions. Oh my God, look what a small rock I am. I mean, I'm just one of thousands of rocks. Or what I had was the opposite feeling. Wow, I'm a part of this journey of millions of human beings who I am connected to, who were born before I came, thousands of people who will be here after I come. And if I can just surrender and be of service to the great experiment of life, perhaps I'll find happiness instead of being so wrapped up in the story of my own life. So it's so much more we can talk about with Conceit. But it was a really beautiful experience for me. And I feel like in many ways on my sabbatical, I lost myself, which is actually, as I said, the great task of life is not actually to find yourself, but to get lost. And one important point, I bet the listeners will realize your happiest moments of your life were when you were lost in something, not when you were thinking about your happiness. You may have been lost in your kids, lost in your work, lost in some purpose, lost in some activity, where for that moment you forgot about yourself. And that's what conceit is about. It's about taming the thief is to forget about yourself and to get lost.
Very helpful framing. Thank you, John.
You know, this third thief, the thief of coveting, I love this guy, right, because he's looking out because his greatest reference for whether he's happy is to compare himself with others. And coveting is to desire with envy something that you don't have, right? Often that someone else does have. And if you think about how much of our unhappiness in life comes because we compare ourselves with others, and it can be as silly as someone has more friends on Facebook or more likes than we have, or someone, wrote books, but they sold more than I did, or, all the kind of covetedness that we have. And each thief in the book has a kind of mascot, and I won't spoil it for people by tell you what each one is, but my mascot for this one was the Wicked Queen in Snow White. And many of you may remember that the Wicked Queen, would look in the mirror every morning and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And she was only happy as long as she was the fairest of them all. It didn't matter that she was beautiful. All she wanted to know was, am I more beautiful than everyone else? And so much of our unhappiness in life comes because of the way we compare ourselves with others instead of the oppositional force of coveting is gratitude. And there's so much research now about what happens when we are in a place of gratitude in our lives. And I'll tell you a really great simple example of that. There's fascinating research I share in the book about social media and happiness. And it turns out that when you take people off of Facebook and social media, for the most part, the research says that people get happier when they're off social media. And it suggests that the main reason for that is that when we're, for example, on Facebook or Instagram, we're living the B roles of our life, looking at the A roles of other people's life. So, no one posts on Facebook, here I am bored, miserable, and lonely today. Here I am doing nothing of interest. And so we kind of wind up comparing ourselves with others and being unhappy. But the fascinating thing is that there's also research that shows that when people are on Facebook or social media, not comparing themselves with others, but instead liking the photos of others, adding to the conversation of others, celebrating with gratitude the happiness of others, getting involved in causes together, then social media actually makes you more happy. So ironically, one of the things I talk about in this chapter is it's not just being about grateful for our own gifts and focusing on what's working in our lives, but it's also of being in a place of gratitude towards others. One of the simple practices I talk about in the book is every day to take a few moments to identify some things you're grateful for in your own life, but also to identify one person in your life you might be covetous towards. And instead of being in an energy of coveting, to celebrate with gratitude their success. And so in many ways, coveting is coveting is about beginning to see that happiness is not how I compare with others. Happiness is about being most true to myself and celebrating with gratitude the success of others. Such a subtle thing, but I think most of us will admit a lot of our unhappiness comes from being like this guy, looking out at the world at what we don't have instead of what we do have. And if we can tame this thief, amazing things begin to happen in our lives. I had a funny experience, by the way, in the middle of writing the book, because a friend of mine had gone to Morocco and had slept out in the desert with the kind of Bedouins as I had done at my suggestion. And when I saw her pictures, I realized that she had a lot more likes to her pictures than I had with mine. And I had just read this research about, I was in the middle of writing the coveting chapter, and I was so tempted to not like her photos. And then I realized, oh, this is the thief of conceit. So not only did I like her photos, but I sent her a wonderful note, not reminding her in any way that I was the one who had, suggested she do that, but say, wow, you had such a great experience. You guys look so happy. I'm so happy for you. And the funny thing is, I was happier. Instead of being in that covetous mindset, I was in a mindset of gratitude and just knowing, wow, I helped her have this experience. Who cares if anyone else knows that? I know that. So anyway, it was a great, of course, my partner Janice said, how embarrassing to share that. You better say in the book, it's embarrassing to admit this. So that's what I said. It's embarrassing to admit this, which it is.
But it's also helpful, John, because you're admitting that this is something that you yourself, even though you've written the book, still struggle with, even in the midst of writing the book.
Yeah, and and we'll get to this, but the fighting, taming the thieves is a daily experience. So anyway.
Indeed. So how about the next thief of consumption?
Yeah, we're going to have to move more quickly, unfortunately. That's why I guess you have to have a big book to talk about, or a small book, but to talk about it. But consumption is a really interesting one, because first there's the obvious thing, of course, that we think stuff is going to make us happy. But this chapter is actually this thief is much more insidious than that. This is the thief that tells us that happiness is outside of ourselves instead of a choice of the mind. And one of the things that I came to realize is that happiness is really realizing that I can choose to be happy at any moment. You know, I meditate every day, and at the beginning of my meditation, I have a mantra. We're going to talk about mantras in a minute. But at the beginning of my meditation every day, I say these 3 words: I choose contentment. And one of the things about this thief is this thief is hanging around when you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to be happy if, or I'm going to be happy when. And it doesn't really matter what comes after, I'm going to be happy when, or I'm going to be happy if. The truth is that thing will not make you happy. Happiness is actually a choice to choose to be happy right now, at any moment in your life. So consumption, while part of this chapter is about, this thief is about stuff and thinking that things will make us happy, but a lot of it is realizing that happiness is a choice, not about what is happening in our lives, but an internal choice to choose contentment at any moment. And it's actually a very radical idea that actually your happiness is not dependent on anything but your choosing to be happy. So this is really what this thief is about. So again, you know it's around when you're thinking, I will be happy if and I will be happy when. It doesn't matter because whatever comes next is a lie. The truth is you can choose to be happy now. And this is kind of what this thief is about. I love this thief, the thief of comfort, because now people are going, John, you have pushed it too far. Why is comfort a thief? And comfort is a thief for 2 reasons. First of all, because we know from the neuroscience on happiness that when human beings are hardwired for habits, but we are excited by change. So the truth is, the more we get into comfortable routines, the more unhappy we are. So examples I give in the book are, if you want romance in your relationship, romance is almost always from something new happening, a new experience, a new place you go together, a new place that you explore. If you want happiness in your work, you have to get out of whatever comfortable routine you're in and seek newness and change. But more importantly in this chapter, I talk about the fact that as human beings, we get into patterns that are, if you will, antithetical to our happiness, but the pattern no longer works for us, but we stay in that pattern or routine. And I share many examples of the book of people that I've met, including myself, of how we get into these comfortable routines of our life that get in the way of our happiness, and instead of challenging these routines that no longer serve us, often that come from our childhood or our early experiences, we wind up staying in those patterns. So one of the examples I share in the book is because of the kind of hellish adolescence that I had, I really learned to play it safe. And so, my greatest kind of, goal in life was not to take a risk where I would not be successful. And that pattern helped me get through my adolescence, but as I moved into my adulthood, I held on to that pattern even though it now got in the way of my happiness. And many people have these patterns in our life, and I give examples from other people in the book, that we hold on to that actually now get in the way of our happiness. So this comfort thief wants us to stay riding a horse that we no longer know why we're riding. And so this is about challenging the patterns of our life that really get in the way of our happiness.
So John, let's talk for a moment about how we can combat these thieves that are robbing us of our natural state of happiness.
Yeah. A lot of the book is devoted to this idea. And, one of the great things about writing a book is you don't really know what's going to resonate for people until people start reading the book. So what the early reviews and reactions to the book have told me is that one of the most helpful parts of the book is this simple model that I teach in the book, which is notice, stop, replace. And so what do we do when these mental thought patterns, the thieves, show up in our lives? And I know you're going to notice them now over the next few days. Well, the first thing is you've got to notice them. You've got to see them for what they are. So when I say, boy, I want to control the outcome, my happiness is in the outcome. You know, boy, my happiness is in how I compare with that other person. My happiness is in, being focused on my small self instead of getting lost in serving other things. We have to first notice the thief. We have to notice that it's there. And the second thing is we have to stop it. And one of the things I talk about in the book is you got to see the thief. You got to unmask them. Then you've got to arrest them. And so I give a lot of very practical ways in the book to stop those thoughts when they happen. And, I was talking to a client yesterday when I was at Boeing, the head of one of their divisions, and we were talking about this very idea. And we were talking about how these thieves are natural thought patterns. They're going to come in. But we have to realize, just like in meditation, we have the power just to stop a thought. So I give people techniques in the book. How do you stop the thief? And then finally, we've got to replace it with a different mindset. And we'll talk in a minute in the mantras about what those oppositional mindsets are. But it's almost like it's one thing to notice the pattern. I'm thinking today I have to be in control. If I don't get to play tennis at 5, if I don't get home in time, if I don't get that outcome from this person, I'm not going to be happy. I've got to notice that and stop it. But then I've got to replace it with a more helpful mindset. And that's what the mantras are about, which I know we're going to talk about next. So this simple model, notice, stop, release. Again, one of the things I've heard from people who've read the book so far is that one of the most helpful books is this idea of the 5 mantras. And mantras is a very ancient idea through almost all of the spiritual traditions, are these ideas of words or phrases that we would say over and over again that train our mind for happiness. You talked about that earlier, Becky, about how we train our mind for happiness. And I know one person who's read the book told me they have a little meditation altar when they meditate in the morning. And they've got these 5 mantras that they now read at the beginning of their day. Another person told me they're carrying this around with them, and it's become incredibly helpful. So you can see how the 5 mantras are a reaction to the 5 thieves. To control, I choose to be in the present moment and embrace whatever is. Happiness is not in the outcome that I seek. Conceit, coveting, the third one. Life is not a contest. I will be grateful for what I have and who I am. I will celebrate the success of others. For when I celebrate for others, I am happy. The second one, the antidote, if you will, to conceit. I am connected to all that is. Even when I die, I'm already connected to all that is. And if I can contribute to the good of the whole, happiness will find me rather than me having to seek it. So again, I don't have to go through each one of them, but the mantras are kind of the replacement thoughts for the thieves. And again, from the early people who've read the book, people say this is one of the most helpful things in the book. And I have to tell you, doing these 5 mantras every day since I came back from my sabbatical have been incredible for me. Because think about, the mind is like any muscle. You have to train it. I work out. Some people may work out or want to work out. And, your muscles hurt when you first start doing it. You first learn to meditate. You can't quiet the mind. In many ways, this book is about how do you quiet the mind and replace the thieves with a new way of thinking that becomes then habitual, which is ultimately what we want, right?
Sure, and I'm getting feedback in our question panel. One listener is wishing that she could copy and paste these mantras. So just a reminder that we are going to send the slides, so you'll have the opportunity to see these again and use them to create new habits in your thinking.
They're very helpful.
So we're going to pause for a moment, I believe, John, and we're going to launch a poll because we'd really love to hear from those of you who have been hanging in there with us and learning about the 5 thieves. We'd love to know which thief you struggle with the most. And I'm noticing that when I typed this, I spelled thief wrong, and I bet I'm not the only one who does that. No, I didn't. I did spell it correctly.
Yeah,
okay, good. Right. So which thief do you struggle with the most? And we would love to see your answers on this, and I'll share the results with you in just a few minutes. John, curious, while we're waiting for people's results to come in, which of these do you think you struggle with the most, if you're willing to share?
Well, let me tell you, all 5 thieves show up most weeks. I think control is the hardest thief for me, right? I'm a type A person. I like to really plan and have goals and all of that. And just this idea of all suffering comes from acceptance of whatever is at any moment. The flight is delayed. I'm stuck in traffic. I didn't get that speaking gig. My partner didn't respond the way I wish they would tonight, right? I think for me, control is one that many, many people struggle with. And again, if you can just keep reminding yourself, all suffering is resistance to whatever is at any moment. Which doesn't mean, by the way, I don't have intentions, I don't take action, but I surrender to whatever is instead of resisting it. So for me, I'd say control is the biggest thief that I struggle with.
Well, that resonates with what I'm seeing behind the scenes from our attendees. I'm going to give just a couple more seconds. About 70% of you have voted, and I'm going to show those results in just a second. And thanks to all of you who have taken the time to share. And let's take a look at these results together. I'm going to share that really fast. Okay, so 50% of you said that control is the thief that you struggle with most. Close behind is comfort with 19%, and coveting in third. And John, I want to thank you for sharing what you shared about Facebook and the data. I'm glad that you included that in the book, along with the really helpful perspective that when you get involved in causes or in encouraging others on social media, you can have a much happier experience.
Yeah, and just this idea that happiness, and I learned this in the 5 Secrets book, and my own experience in writing The Thieves reinforced that. We all have to remember our happiest moments, if we're honest, are those moments when we're not sitting around thinking about our happiness. My happiest moments in the Camino, when as I was not in resistance to whatever was, I was just in the moment. My happiest moments was when I was serving other people in some small way and just kind of getting lost in life. So I think it's such a important, and this thing about just being grateful towards others expands your world in a profound way.
So let's talk for a few minutes, John. I know that one of your very important values is the value of our environment and creating a sustainable world. And one of the key things about the book is a reflection not only about how the thieves rob us as individuals, but also how the thieves are robbing humanity. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
And I know in this short hour we gave short shrift to a really important part of the book, right? Because in each chapter on each thief, I talk about the way these very thieves that rob our personal happiness are robbing humanity of our highest potential. And for people who are really interested in the question about how do we create a sustainable, compassionate society, a world we want our children to live in, these parts of the book are going to be very engaging for those readers. And again, unfortunately, today we focus, more on the personal happiness. But just to give you a hint, I talk in the book, for example, about how the desire for control, to be in control of the dissonance that we feel when others' viewpoints differ from ours, how this desire for control is getting in the way of us really entertaining the ideas of others, having a more civil society, solving complex problems by being open to views that are not our own. Conceit. I talk about how our focus on our species, on our tribe or country, and even our own one generation are actually leading us to really destroy the future for all generations yet to come, and literally causing a great extinction among other species because of our conceit of being so focused on our species and our small story and our tribe and even our generation. I talk about how all of humanity are stuck in patterns that no longer serve us. Such as, for example, for most of our history, our greatest struggle was to overcome nature, because nature was in charge and we were so small and so few. And we now continue that pattern, even though we're now the greatest force of nature. But we've continued that old pattern, whereas now our role must be to help nature not to overcome it, or even seeing force as what makes us safe. I talk in the book, for example, about terrorism and the fact that the research really shows if we want people not to be terrorists, we actually have to reach out to them and actually help them build bridges rather than try to treat them like criminals. And there's some fascinating stuff in the book around that if we don't challenge some of our paradigms around the thieves that are robbing all of humanity, we're really going to be in trouble. And by the way, if you look on our Twitter feeds from the last few days, I just wrote a blog for sustainable brands called The 5 Thieves Robbing Humanity's Future. So people who want to look at that, that's a good way to dig into that. Again, short shrift because there's a lot of good stuff in the book, but it's one of the parts of the book I'm most proud of, actually.
Well, and I can include that link, John, if you send it over to me in our follow-up material so the attendees can access it. We have lots of questions that have flooded in, and before we address any of them, I'd love to have you just share a bit more about this book and how it's going to help our attendees today.
First of all, writing a book is a labor of love. This was the easiest book for me to write of all the 7 books I've written. I felt it just flowed out of me. It was a joy to write. There's 4 reasons why I think this book is going to be so helpful to you and to anyone in your life who struggles with happiness. First, lots of practical ideas on how to stop thought patterns that rob us of happiness every day. This is an incredibly practical book. Lots of inspiring stories. I know people who are fans of my book, The 5 Secrets and Second Innocence, and my previous books know I'm a storyteller. And lots of inspiring stories, not only about myself, but about others. The third thing is I really show how each one of us can contribute to a better society by challenging these thieves in our sphere of influence. So rather than think this is just a book about what humanity has to do, I feel I really show you how in your daily life you can confront these thieves that are robbing humanity. And finally, I think it's a great companion with the 5 secrets you must discover before you die. If you've read it already, you're going to love this book. If you haven't read that, I really encourage people to get both of these books together. Probably even Amazon gives you a deal, I think, if you get both of them. But here's the reason. Because the 5 secrets you must discover before you die tells you what you have to do to find happiness. And the 5 thieves of happiness shows you what you have to avoid to find happiness. So I feel like, in a way, this book completes the journey I took for the 5 secrets. In some ways, I didn't realize it at the time, but the journey was incomplete. I really didn't know all the secrets to happiness until I wrote this book. And all I can say is the journey to write these 2 books has made a huge difference for my happiness. And I'm just so excited if others get the book and share it with others, because I want to spread that experience of happiness. And I want to challenge our thinking to create a better world.
Thank you so much, John. So we have a few questions and some that have come in more than once. So I'm going to start with a question that came in from 2 listeners. John, they're curious whether you see a difference between being happy and being joyful, and if so, how you would differentiate the 2.
Yeah, in the book I actually talk about my struggle to use the word happiness. And I wound up choosing the word happiness because I think it's the word of the day, right? Meaning, I think if you polled most people, what are you looking for certainly in Western society, people would say, I want to be happy. I agree that there are subtle distinctions. I actually prefer the word contentment. I prefer the word meaning because, for example, much of what makes us human life meaningful are the struggles of life, the more difficult moments of life, where we might find joy. For example, let's take parenting as an example. Parenting is not always a happy experience, but it is most often a very meaningful and joyful experience in the sense that there's a sense that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves, right, of molding another human life, of even extending the experiment of life. So again, I have to give the question probably short shrift because I want to get to other questions. But yes, I think there are subtle distinctions, and I'm less in love with the word happiness than I am with words like joy, contentment, meaning. And I talk about that in the book a bit, about why I chose happiness, but that there are other words that maybe are more important than happiness, because happiness, again, is so often connected to happenings, and that's not really what we want to be true. So thank you for the question.
Sure. So I have a couple of comments that came in from an attendee named Jay, and they came in toward the beginning of the hour, so I'm thinking we may have answered it with the content of the webinar. But Jay's comment was, do you think that the primary reason that we can't find happiness is that we are bombarded by information and voices telling us what's important rather than seeking that happiness within us?
Yeah, I think that is true. You know, I discovered that when I interviewed people for the 5 Secrets. So many of them said to me, you've got to hear your own voice. You've got to hear what is true for you, what brings you happiness. I also think we are bombarded with messages that say happiness is hard. You got to work at it. You know, you're naturally unhappy. There's all these things. Think of all the advertising that we're given. You know, you'd be happy if you have this car. You'd be happy if you had this experience. You'd be happy if you meet the right person. You know, so I think, Jay, we're also bombarded with messages that say that happiness is hard, that happiness is a giant quest, that happiness is outside of yourself. That's why I'm so in love with this idea of training our mind for happiness. And, you know, my friend Marshall Goldsmith, who was kind enough to write a great foreword for the book, he kind of says that's one of the big things that he got out of the book was just this idea that, you know, that happiness is in here. And I think what Jay is saying is true. We're bombarded with messages that say that you got to seek happiness out there. But it isn't out there. It's in here. So that's why training our mind for happiness is so important. And that's really what the book is about.
Sure. So Sam is commenting here, John, I think you'll get a kick out of this, that another way to foster happiness would be to avoid mainstream media because TV news is over-sensationalized and designed to agitate, and then people who are agitated want to consume more to feel better. So that's an interesting cycle. Maybe it's any kind of media, not just social media, that can fuel that unhappiness or comparison.
Yeah, you know, I agree, and maybe do a little corollary or footnote to that. Although I agree with that, and I do, Sam, so thanks for that comment, is that, once again, the thieves are what rob us of our happiness, not that media. Now, it is true, we should avoid things that rob happiness and meaning from our lives, right? On the other hand, it's important to be informed. But remember, it's the thieves. Let's take coveting as a great example. It's not the news about other people that robs us of our happiness. It triggers it. What robs us of our happiness is the thief mindset of coveting, that my happiness, like the wicked, you know, queen in Snow White, is dependent on the mirror telling me I have more friends, more likes, more whatever than you do. So I think, Sam, what's important for all of us to remember is that it's not the media are triggers. Other people are triggers. It's our internal mindset of surrendering to the thieves that winds up robbing us ultimately of the happiness. So no matter how hard you try to avoid the triggers, I guess that's my point, the triggers will find you. You just may avoid some of them. So how are you going to deal with the triggers when they happen? And that's where the mantras and the training of the mind comes in, right?
That makes a whole lot of sense, and answers a question that came in from Manju, if that's how you say your name, sir, I hope, who was asking, what do you do when your day gets off track if you start happy and then later you find that you get away from that? And it does go back to that choosing the right mindset in the moment.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you two of the things, Manju, that really help for me. One is these 2 phrases. I choose contentment, and I surrender to whatever is at this very moment. I think those 2 thoughts alone are so profound. Now, again, one of the early people who read the book said they were afraid when they read my book that I would basically be saying, become passive, just surrender to whatever's happening in your life, have no intentions for your life. And one of the parts of the book people seem to love is I talk about intention without attachment. So how do I have intentions and goals in my life, even for my day, as well as my bigger life, without getting attached to them? So this is one of the kind of subtle things I work with in the book, is that I'm not saying become passive and don't have any goals or intentions in your life, but whenever your day gets off course, bring those 2 mantras in. I surrender to whatever is at this very moment. Great example, I'm stuck in a traffic jam. I really want to go home, be with my partner, get on the sofa, watch the game, whatever it is, and suddenly there's a traffic jam when I didn't expect it. Where does your unhappiness come from in that moment? If we're honest, it comes from not surrendering to what is. If I can control it and find another route, I should do that. Viktor Frankl talks about that in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. If you're suffering, the first thing you should do is try to get away from the suffering. But if you can't, then you surrender to whatever is in that moment, and you choose to be content. And once you choose to be content, so it may sound so silly, here's my challenge to people. For the next 30 days, every time you get triggered, let those two mantras enter your mind. I surrender to whatever is at this moment, and I choose contentment. Watch what happens. I think you'll be surprised.
So there's a question I've been sitting on for a while, John, because I feel like it's a challenging one to answer, but I'm going to share it with you. We had one listener, Marjorie, ask the question related to the issue of surrender and how it applies in many situations, kind of asking this bigger question about what about, issues that, say, refugees worldwide are facing or other traumatic or life-threatening situations. In what way can we apply the principles of this book to those kind of bigger picture tragic moments that we might find ourselves in?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a huge question, and I appreciate it, Marjorie. And again, in the book, I think I tackle that in a lot of different ways. So not trying to sell the book to you, but I do think this book will really help to deepen this conversation in all kinds of ways. I guess my short answer to that question is that I guess there's two things. One is to always ask the question, what can I do? In my last book, Stepping Up, one of the things I talk about is that whenever you encounter something really challenging in the world, the question one must always ask is, what can I do about this, however small my action may be? And so don't confuse surrender again with not taking action. What's one small thing I can do to feel empowered that I am doing something about that? An example for me, Marjorie, is I'm a big environmentalist, and I love the oceans, and the oceans are drowning in plastic garbage. And, one of the things I chose to do was to give up plastic straws, plastic water bottles, and plastic shopping bags 5 years ago. And in my own small way, and to spread that message about that. Now the ocean is still choking in garbage, but I feel better because I'm doing my part and I've spread that message. So don't get hijacked by what you can't do. Ask, what can I do? And then also know that this is a long arc of history. We have to have patience, and I believe humanity is going to tame these thieves if each one of us does our part. But again, these are challenging things. But I think, again, in the book you'll find I deepen that conversation. It's such a big question. We could spend an hour just on that, and I'd love to, actually.
Indeed, and thanks for your bravery in addressing it, John. I think that that question of what small thing can I do is a great point. So as we wrap up the hour today, I promised at the beginning of the call that I was going to give away something that I've never given away on a webinar, and Barrett Kohler, the publisher of the 5 Thieves of Happiness, has created some amazing t-shirts with the original art that you saw in today's presentation, and I have 5 of them to give away. And so what I'd like you to do, if you'd like a chance to win one of those shirts, and they'll be shipping in a couple of weeks, is to email me, Becky@weavinginfluence.com, and share some feedback about this event, what resonated with you, what was helpful, what you learned. And from those people who submit, I'll get back to 5 of you with the offer of a free t-shirt. I also want to encourage you today to be sure to buy John's latest book, The 5 Thieves of Happiness. It's available on Amazon in the US and in Canada and other online retailers. Look for it in airport bookstores if you're traveling this spring. And look for it in actual stores wherever you might go. And please, if you would support us also, if you've already read the book and could leave an Amazon review, we would very much appreciate your support in that way. John, thank you so much for investing your energy and your focus and sharing your wisdom and insights with us. Someone's asking for my email again. It's Becky@weavinginfluence.com, and you've gotten other emails from me regarding the webinar, so you should be able to find my email address. And we'll be happy to send some shirts out to those a few of you who participated with us today. Again, John, thank you so much.
Yeah, Becky, just one last thing to add to people. First of all, these T-shirts are really cool. So send an email to Becky. We've never had a T-shirt for a book before, but this will be a conversation starter. It's a cool black T-shirt with those little images of each of those 5 thief characters, which are really very lovely. I don't even have one myself yet. I'm going to have to send an email so I can win one. And the second thing is, please, if you've read the book, I'd love to hear from you. We'd love you to do a review. And I really hope that that this book will bring greater happiness to you and the people you love, and maybe start a conversation about how we can create a better world together by taming the mindsets that are robbing all of us of our highest potential. So it was a joy to write, and I want to thank Becky and especially you for giving me an hour of your life, and I hope in some way it's added some real value to your day.
Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.